Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little different. We're going back in time to the early 1990s in Pakistan to look at a single legal conflict.
And it's a conflict that, on the surface, seems very local, very specific. But its impact was anything but.
Exactly. It didn't just win a neighborhood battle. It ended up redefining human rights on a global scale. We're talking about a case that fundamentally changed the meaning of the word life inside a country's constitution.
It's a true masterclass in how law evolves. We're looking at a moment where a community's fear about a new piece of infrastructure, it clashed directly with the power of the state.
And that's the core of it. We are diving deep into the landmark case of Ms. Shehla Zia versus WAPDA. That's the Water and Power Development Authority. The case was decided in 1994 by Pakistan's Supreme Court.
And the central talk, it sounds so simple, but it was completely revolutionary at the time.
It was. Does the right to life, which is guaranteed under Article 9 of the Constitution, does that right also include the right to a clean and safe environment?
It's a huge conceptual leap, isn't it?
Yeah.
From just the right to, exist to the right to a quality of existence.
So for you, our listener, our mission today is to really peel back the layers of this decision. We want to extract the core insights and understand how a legal system, really in a single judgment, can pivot to see environmental protection not as some secondary issue, but as a core, undeniable human right.
And you have to understand the timing here. I mean, this is 1994. Environmental movements are gaining steam globally, for sure. But this ruling, it stands as South Asia's earliest, most definitive judicial recognition of environmental rights as fundamental human rights.
So it's not just a legal footnote.
Oh, not at all. It's a cornerstone. It's the foundation for so much of the modern environmental law that came after it, not just in Pakistan, but across the entire region. It gave activists and citizens real legal leverage.
It seems like it did more than just settle a dispute. It set a new standard.
It did. It set a moral, a legal, and an institutional standard. It basically said that national development, especially these big state-led projects, has to be balanced. You have to weigh the necessity against the health, the safety, and the constitutional rights of the people.
So what was the conflict? What was this David versus Goliath fight that sparked this whole constitutional revolution?
It all started with a plan to build a high-voltage grid station.
Okay.
And the location was near a residential neighborhood in Islamabad. The citizens there became intensely afraid of something they couldn't even see.
Electromagnetic radiation.
Exactly. And that very specific, localized fear, that became the battleground for the entire Constitution.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the beginning.
What set the scene?
Right. Let's go to Islamabad in the early 1990s. You have to picture what's happening there at the time.
It was a period of really rapid change for Pakistan. Islamabad, which was purpose-built as the capital, was just exploding in terms of growth, industrializing, expanding.
And all that growth needs power.
It needs a massive amount of power. And the state agency in charge of delivering that power was WAPDA, the Water and Power Development Authority.
And we should probably clarify for everyone, WAPDA isn't just some local utility company.
No. WAPDA is. It's the engine of national development. They're responsible for the entire country's water and power resources. So when WAPDA decides to build something, it comes with the full weight of the state behind it. The assumption is that it's a national necessity.
So their plan was to build a new grid station.
A high-voltage one, yes. A 132 kV grid station. Absolutely essential for managing the electricity flow to a growing capital city. But the problem, the flashpoint, was the location. It was planned for a site right next to a populated residential area in a neighborhood called Sector F8.
And that takes it from an abstract infrastructure plan straight into people's lives, into their backyards.
Literally. And the residents, who were led by a woman named Mrs. Shehla Zia, they weren't just mounting one of those not in my backyard protests.
It wasn't about the view or the noise.
Exactly. That's a crucial distinction. They were focused on what they saw as a direct existential threat to their families.
So they weren't arguing that Islamabad didn't need more electricity.
Not at all. They were arguing against the specific cost of that electricity to them, to their health, to their quality of life, to their children's future.
Yeah.
And the threat they zeroed in on was this very modern, invisible danger. The fear of long-term exposure to electromagnetic fields, or EMF, coming from those high-voltage lines.
That feels like a really smart legal strategy. Why was focusing on EMF so important?
Because it immediately elevated the whole issue. Traditional pollution, smoke from a factory, chemical waste in a river, it's tangible. You can see it, you can smell it. But electromagnetic radiation, especially back in the early 90s, it was this kind of frontier challenge. The long-term health effects were still being debated by scientists all over the world. There was a lot of uncertainty.
So by focusing on that specific invisible threat, they weren't just fighting a zoning issue.
They were fighting for the sanctity of their lives and their health. And that, they argued, demanded the courts get involved immediately.
Okay, let me just push back here for a second and try to see it from WAPDA's side.
Oh, yeah.
If the science was so uncertain at the time, wouldn't WAPDA have a pretty strong defense? They could just say, look, there's no conclusive proof of harm.
And that's exactly what they did say.
Right. They argued that stopping a vital national project based on what they called a speculative, unproven fear, well, that would set a terrible precedent. How could a developing nation ever build anything?
That was their entire defense. The fear is speculative, and national infrastructure has to come first. But the citizens had a way to get around that. A very specific, very powerful legal tool.
And that was Article 184(3) of the Constitution.
That was their constitutional ace in the hole.
I find this part fascinating. That one provision seems to have completely changed the game for public interest law in Pakistan. Break it down for us again. Why was it so powerful in this case?
So Article 184(3) is basically a constitutional shortcut. It's designed for exactly these kinds of moments. It gives the Supreme Court of Pakistan what's called suo motu power.
Which means?
It means the court can take notice of an issue on its own, or based on just a simple application, if the issue involves a matter of public importance that's connected to a fundamental right.
So wait, if I'm understanding this, the usual path for a lawsuit, you file in a lower court, you spend years gathering evidence, then there are appeals. That all takes forever.
A decade, maybe more, and by then, the grid station would be built. The potential damage would already be done.
So this was a way to sidestep that entire process.
Precisely. The normal legal process is often too slow to protect people from powerful state actors. Article 184(3) lets citizens jump the line. A petition based on a real, immediate fear about public health can land directly in front of the highest judges in the country. It's the judiciary activating its power to defend citizens when the normal system isn't enough.
So the court didn't have to wait for someone to actually get sick from radiation. The potential for harm was enough for them to use their most powerful constitutional tool.
And that completely transformed the debate. It stopped being about zoning laws or regulatory permits. Suddenly, it was about whether the state, in its push to modernize, was violating the most basic promise it makes to its people, the right to life.
By even agreeing to hear the case under 184(3), the court was already making a huge statement.
They were. They were implicitly saying, yes, the potential health risks from this one project in this one neighborhood, they have national importance. It raises questions about the state's responsibility and, the very meaning of life itself.
It turned a local fight into a national debate about what the Constitution actually stands for. And the court had to answer that huge question. Does the right to life include the right to a clean environment?
And if the answer was yes, everything's about to change.
Which is where it gets really, really interesting. Because the court didn't just make a narrow ruling about where to put the grid station, they used this opportunity to redefine the entire constitutional basis for human dignity.
They did. Which brings us right into the core of it all. The groundbreaking judgment of 1994 and how it reinterpreted life itself.
The ruling came from a 3-member bench led by Justice Salim Akhtar. When you look at it, was this a small incremental step, or was it a sudden leap?
Oh, it's a sudden revolutionary shift.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a moment of real judicial courage. The bench recognized that a constitution has to be a living document. It has to evolve.
Meaning the dangers people face in the 1990s are different from the ones people faced when the Constitution was first written.
Far more complex. And the interpretation of fundamental rights has to keep up with those new realities.
So the core legal principle, the ratio decidendi, the reason for the decision, it all came down to how they reread Article 9, the right to life.
It did.
What was the old way of looking at it? What was the traditional view they were pushing against?
The traditional sort of conservative view was that life under Article 9 meant little more than animal existence.
Just being alive.
Just being alive. The right not to be killed by the state without due process.
Yeah.
The right to breathe. It was a very narrow, very physical definition of survival.
And the court explicitly rejected that.
Completely and unequivocally. The judges wrote that the term life is emphatically not confined to mere animal existence. And that single statement, that rejection, is the linchpin. It's what holds the entire judgment together and creates the space for all the environmental law that followed.
Okay, so if it's not just about existing, what is it? What was the new expanded definition of life that the court created? This is really the key takeaway for everyone listening.
The expanded view defined life as a life of dignity, comfort, and health. It's
Wow.
monumental
Right.
because what it does is it creates a qualitative standard for a constitutional right. It's saying the state's job isn't just to keep you from dying. It's to actively help create the conditions for a life that is actually worth living.
Let's focus on that word dignity. That's a powerful word. What does a life of dignity mean in a legal sense? What does it require the state to do?
Legally, it implies two major things. First, a negative duty, the duty of non-derogation. The state can't take actions that diminish your quality of life, like, for instance, forcing you to live next to something that you believe is a health hazard.
Okay.
And second, it implies an affirmative duty, a positive duty.
Right.
The state must actively work to make sure basic conditions are met, clean air, safe water. Because when those things are degraded, human dignity itself is degraded. If a state project makes you live in constant fear for your family's health,
Yeah.
that is a violation of your dignity.
And that's the direct link to the environment. If your health and comfort are constitutionally protected and environmental hazards like pollution or EMF exposure threaten that health and comfort.
Then those hazards are no longer just regulatory problems, they become potential constitutional violations. The court made a clean environment a non-negotiable prerequisite for a constitutionally protected life.
Which brings us back to the tricky part, the scientific uncertainty. WAPDA's whole defense was that the danger from EMF wasn't proven. How did the court get around that?
This is maybe the most forward-thinking part of the whole ruling. The court, without actually using the term, essentially applied what we now call the precautionary principle.
Explain that.
WAPDA was demanding 100% conclusive scientific proof of harm. The court said no, that's not the right standard. They said that when a state action carries a high probability of risk to a fundamental right like life and health, you cannot wait for absolute, indisputable proof. The potential for harm is enough.
So the court wasn't ruling on scientific certainty, it was ruling on the potential for irreparable harm and the sort of psychological damage of the fear it was creating.
Exactly. And in doing so, it flipped the burden of proof. The court basically said to WAPD, the burden isn't on these citizens to prove they're going to get cancer.
Right.
The burden is on you, the state, to prove that your project is definitively safe before you impose it on them. And that's a seismic shift in how state planning has to work. You can't just justify why a project is necessary, you now have to justify why it's safe.
So this put a huge new mandate on state agencies like WAPDA.
A massive one. It fundamentally changed the whole dynamic. The court mandated that all state agencies have to perform their duties with due regard to environmental protection and public safety. It basically forced them to build environmental awareness into their DNA.
Which means the government can't just say, we need this dam or we need this power plant for the economy, and then just ignore the consequences for people's health.
They now have a constitutional duty to proactively minimize harm. They have to do proper environmental impact assessments. They have to do real health risk analyses. They have to actually listen to the public. These things stopped being bureaucratic suggestions and became constitutional requirements.
The language from the judgment from Justice Salim Akhtar is just so clear on this point. I think it's worth hearing the exact quote because it shows how they directly addressed this modern technological risk.
It really is the quote that defined a new era of jurisprudence in the region, he wrote. If there is danger to life due to environmental hazards such as pollution and the possibility of being exposed to electromagnetic fields, Article 9 is attracted, and a petition under Article 184.3 is maintainable.
It's incredible how specific they are. They didn't use vague language. They explicitly named electromagnetic fields. They saw this new, invisible danger and immediately connected it to the highest constitutional right.
They said the mere possibility of being exposed to that hazard was enough to trigger a fundamental rights violation.
Which was the ultimate validation for the petitioners. It said their fear was legitimate and that using the Article 184 shortcut was the right thing to do.
It was, and the court didn't stop there. They did something else to make sure this ruling would stick, to make sure it was deeply rooted in the country's own values.
They connected it to Islamic principles.
Absolutely. To give the ruling real resilience and legitimacy, they grounded it not just in secular legal theory, but in the nation's core ethical framework. They cited the sanctity of life in Islam and, very importantly, the concept of public welfare, which is known as maslaha.
How does bringing in maslaha strengthen the ruling?
Well, Malasa is this idea of acting in the public interest, of doing what is beneficial for the community and preventing harm. By citing it, the court was saying that protecting the environment isn't some new foreign idea. It's a fundamental requirement of a just Islamic society.
So it wasn't just good law, it was good ethics.
Exactly. It blended constitutional law with widely accepted cultural and moral principles. And that made the judgment incredibly powerful and very difficult to argue against.
It's clear why this case has had such a lasting influence, which I think is a perfect transition for us. Let's move into the long-term impact and the legacy of Shehla Zia v. WAPDA.
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this was the single most important environmental justice decision in Pakistan's history. It created the definitive foundation of environmental jurisprudence for the country.
So before 1994, environmental law was what? A collection of separate regulations?
Fragmented, yes.
Yeah.
After 1994, every single environmental issue suddenly had a constitutional hook.
Because once you expand the definition of life to include health and dignity, then any state action that hurts the environment could potentially be seen as a constitutional violation.
That's the ripple effect. The precedent was used almost immediately in all sorts of other areas. It transformed legal fights over urban planning, industrial pollution, water rights. It empowered a whole new generation of lawyers and activists.
Can you walk us through a real-world example? How would this precedent actually work in a different kind of case, say, against a factory that's polluting a river?
Okay, let's take a classic scenario. Imagine a leather tannery that's dumping untreated toxic waste into a river. And that river is the main source of drinking water for a village downstream. Before Shehla Zia, the villagers would have had to go through a long, slow regulatory process. Maybe the factory gets a small fine. Nothing really changes.
But after 1994, they have a new weapon.
A constitutional weapon. The factory dumping waste is no longer just a regulatory issue.
It's a violation of the villagers' right to a life of health and dignity under the new Article 9.
Precisely. So they could file a petition directly to the Supreme Court under Article 184(3). They'd cite Shehla Zia as the precedent, and the court would be empowered to issue much stronger orders.
Like what?
Like ordering the factory to shut down immediately until it installs proper treatment facilities, or ordering a massive, expensive cleanup, or even in extreme cases, ordering the industry to be relocated entirely.
What?
It forces the state to protect its citizens.
That is a complete reversal of power. The burden of proof is now on the polluter and the state to prove they aren't harming people.
And we saw the same logic applied to urban planning. If a city government approved a new highway that would destroy a vital green space and worsen air quality, citizens could challenge it. They could argue the city was failing its constitutional duty, the duty established in Shehla Zia, to ensure a life of health and dignity for its residents.
So the case wasn't just about power lines. It created the legal toolkit to fight everything from water pollution to bad urban design.
It connected all those localized environmental problems to the highest law in the land. And its influence didn't stop at Pakistan's borders.
Right. You mentioned its regional importance.
We have to keep reiterating this. By making this move so early, in 1994, Pakistan really became a leader in environmental law in the region. The judgment was studied and cited in courts in neighboring countries. It inspired similar rulings across South Asia.
When you step back and look at it, it's just amazing. A small group of residents in Islamabad, led by Ms. Shehla Zia, they stood up to this huge state development agency.
And in doing so, they secured a constitutional guarantee for millions of people they would never meet. They weren't just fighting WAPDA, they were future-proofing their constitution against environmental neglect.
It's really the ultimate story of how citizen action, when it's channeled through a brave and proactive judiciary, can change everything.
It confirms that the law, especially constitutional law, isn't just a dusty old book of rules. It's a living thing.
Which really brings us to the philosophical takeaway here, the moral of the story.
I think the moral is that we have to see the law as more than just a shield to protect us from harm. It's also a promise. It's a promise of a life that can be lived with dignity, with health, and in harmony with the natural world.
It's a much more expansive view of what a modern state owes its people.
It is. It's an assertion that for humans to truly flourish, they need guaranteed access to a clean environment, and they need to be free from state-sponsored environmental threats.
That feels more relevant today than ever, with climate change and all the other complex risks we're facing. The Shehla Zia ruling is a lesson that our constitutions have to keep evolving to meet those new risks.
Absolutely. The court showed that the very idea of life, as protected by law, has to include the conditions necessary for that life to be meaningful. And a safe, clean environment is one of those conditions.
Okay, that was a lot. Let's do a quick comprehensive review. What are the core nuggets that you, the listener, should take away from this deep dive?
Okay, first and most important, the constitutional shift. Article 9, the right to life, was completely redefined. It's not just about animal existence anymore. It's about dignity, comfort, and health.
Second, the legal strategy. That constitutional shortcut, Article 184.3, was the key. It allowed a public interest case about potential health risks to get to the Supreme Court immediately.
Third, the court's attitude toward risk. They used the precautionary principle. They said you don't need 100% scientific proof of harm from new technologies like electromagnetic fields when people's fundamental rights are on the line.
Fourth, the practical impact. This ruling created the entire foundation for modern environmental law in Pakistan. It shifted the burden of proof onto the state and polluters to prove their projects are safe, not just necessary.
And fifth, the moral foundation. The ruling wasn't just based on legal theory. It was grounded in widely accepted Islamic principles of public welfare, or maslaha, which gave it incredible legitimacy and strength.
That's the incredible legacy of one court case, driven by a few determined citizens. As we wrap up, I want to go back to that central tension that this case highlights.
The tension between development and protection.
Exactly. It's a clash we see everywhere in the world. On one side, you have the need for rapid national development. You need power grids, you need roads, you need economic growth. WAPD was the symbol of that.
And on the other side, you have the individual's constitutional right to comfort, to health, to dignity. Shehla Zia was the symbol of that.
And the court, by siding with her, sent a clear message to the state. They said, your need for efficiency, for speed, for development, it does not get to override an individual's right to a healthy life.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. The Shehla Zia ruling forces a specific choice. You must prioritize safety and constitutional rights over development speed and cost. So think about that in our modern context. When we face the need for critical new infrastructure, whether it's a new power source, a high-speed rail line, or the rollout of 5G networks, how much should we be willing to slow down? How much extra cost and time and money and complexity should the state be constitutionally required to take on to protect the health and dignity of every single citizen?
It's a question of where you draw the line. The law now mandates that the line must be drawn in favor of the citizen, but that line is constantly being tested by political and economic pressure.
It is. And the Shehla Zia case is this powerful, enduring reminder that the Constitution is the ultimate tool we have to enforce that balance, even when we're up against the full power of the state.
A truly powerful legacy that started in one small neighborhood. A great thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into constitutional law and the birth of environmental rights in South Asia.
My pleasure. It's an essential piece of legal history to understand.
Until next time, keep digging deeper.